Thank you so much to our presenters. My name is Suzanne Maman, and I am the UNC Faculty Director for this fellowship program. So I get the privilege of moderating our session today, which is Lessons in Peace from Food and Medicine. In this session, we explored the powerful intersection of health and peace building through these two presentations. Gideon examined how antimicrobial resistance, a growing global health crisis, can serve as a bridge for connection between refugee and host communities in Malawi. And then Alexandra took us into the world of food justice, emphasizing that access to nutritious, affordable, and culturally meaningful food is not just a necessity, but a matter of equity and justice. At its core, this discussion highlights how access to health, whether through medicine or food, shapes peace, justice, and community resilience. So I'm going to start out with two questions, one for each of our presenters, and then I'll open it up for questions from the audience. So I'm going to start with you, Gideon. You talked about using the crisis of antimicrobial resistance to foster peace building, but what happens beyond the crisis? What are some ways to ensure sustained collaboration between refugee and host communities?
Right. Thank you very much. I think in different contexts, the first thing I think to understand is what is actually driving the issues between the refugees and the host. So I think once we've done a very good job establishing that, it will help us design a very good approach on how to respond to such challenges. So, for example, the case of Malawi that I shared, I took the crisis as an easier way because there's already like existing programs that are already at work in bringing these two communities together. So once you have a basic understanding of what is working already within the communities, and then you bring in a strategy like this one, to enhance the peace building, I think it's easier for you to sustain the program. However, this could be different in different contexts. But I think to keep it short, I would say I think there has to be continuous interactions between these two communities. And then there has to be a proper understanding of what can really drive the two communities to work together. I think once we've done a good job in establishing that, I think we should be able to sustain the program for a longer time.
Thank you so much, Gideon. And to Ola, you talked about paying the real price of food, but we know many communities are already food insecure. So how do we make this food system more sustainable without placing more burden on communities, particularly those from low resource settings?
Thank you so much for this question. Yeah, I completely agree because we can't ask for people who are already food insecure to pay more. And when you talk about the true cost accounting, it sounds like this is exactly what we're asking. But what we're asking is to show how the system is ineffective in actually supporting people to have access to food that is nutritious and how cheap the ultra-processed food is. So what I found, so the goal isn't to make, of course, like the food more expensive at the checkout line. What needs to change is the system. So, for example, in the US, right now, nearly 70% of federal farm subsidies go to just three crops, which is corn, soy, and wheat. And how do we use it? We use it mostly for industrial livestock and for ultra-processed foods. So if at least part of this money through USDA and other different programs would go to small-scale farmers, to regenerative farming, to growing actually fruit and vegetables, and not just crops basically for feed, that would really bring down the costs for the people. So people actually could access nutritious food with the prices that are still affordable, because right now they are not affordable. I mean, we all grocery shop and we see it. So there are also other things, of course, like supplementally, that now there's a huge discussion about, which is SNAP, which used to be food stamps. There's WEEK, so the supplementary program for women, infants, and children. We don't know what's going to happen to them. There are also universal school meals. There are also other programs that are actually supporting, for example, schools to access their produce locally. I mean, in the perfect world, we would like to have more money there, because when we see it also grows the economy, because when we purchase locally, then it's also purchasing. So it's also perpetuating the development of the economy, right? One way or another, even if it's bought through the government. So I really would like to see also expansion of SNAP and WIC and universal school meals, like the school meals that we have in Durham, for example, for the school year 2024-2025. There was a universal program. Every child without any application has access to breakfast and lunch at school every day.
Thanks, Hila. All right, let's open it up for questions from the audience. And I see we have a hand up right here in the middle.
Thank you. My name is Rick Maddox. I'm from the Petersburg Breakfast Rotary Club in Petersburg, Virginia. I am a master gardener. And so my question is to Alexandra. Food insecurity and food deserts. I work with the Extension Office in Petersburg and also Virginia State University, which has a huge and very productive agricultural program. I'd like to get your thoughts on food insecurity. Is not just one prong, it's not going to solve everything. And what we are doing now and working with the Rotary Club is getting with the community, because I have 13 raised beds in my half-acre backyard, and I produce tons and tons of food. But giving it out to food banks, I have learned, is not necessarily the best best solution to the problem. I love okra. I found out very quickly not everyone loves okra. So in tailoring what we grow and what we give, it has to suit the community, otherwise you have waste. And that's a huge problem with food insecurity too. Now, a problem to you is patio gardens, high tunnels, and not just growing food, but preserving food. Because many of our grandparents, great-grandparents grew their food, preserved it, potatoes, carrots, or canning, and even freezing. And nowadays, with the price of eggs, trust me, more and more of my neighbors are getting chickens. And it's not just laying hens, it's also brooders. So I'd like to get your thoughts on the community getting involved more so than the government.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this question, and also for the work that you do locally. Yeah, I mean, I can talk also even about what's happening here in Durham and like Chapel Hill. And I agree, like, especially right now, I think we just need to really step up our game locally, because I don't know if anyone, for example, heard of the organization Root Causes. So also, you know, I feel like with the food distribution in general and food banks, people want to, you know, it's about dignity as well. Not everyone actually even wants to use SNAP or go to food banks. They want to feel that they purchasing their meals, that they're, you know, treated with dignity. And for example, I love the cooperations between like local farms, like Duke Campus Farm, for example, has a cooperation with a medical school organization, Root Causes, where they're volunteers. It's only students, people from the community from Durham, that are distributing food over the weekends to low-income communities, families, to people who just got out of the hospital, for example, to be able to access fresh produce. There are different co-ops, or for example, small farms who are working together in the area, for example, of Cedar Cove. And I'm thinking about what you said about people not eating okra and preserving, and I love okra, by the way. And it's not something that right? Thank you. So I would love to get one. And, but it's not something that I grew up with. Like, I actually learned how to make okra through my Turkish friends. And I feel like we need education as much as we need access to this produce, right? So, for example, a part of a school meal program should always be education. There should be nutritionists coming to school, showing how to work with food, but also inviting parents. And this is, for example, something I used to work in Brussels, which is, and we had this European-wide school meals program. And part of the money, and actually where more money was put into educational. So every week there has to be a nutritionist coming and teaching about food, but also preparing fresh food from fresh produce from local farms. And I feel like this is as important, but also community fridges. I don't know if anyone knows about community fridges in their area, but in Durham, there are like 4 or 5 places right now that are mapped where you can also leave food and also process food that you made at home. For example, you have a surplus or you made a huge pot of soup, and then people can choose what they want to eat, right? Because it's in the fridge, they can come on their own time, pick up a box with like allergens, everything is described in there. And they feel like, you know, they choose also what they eat, right? So it's their choice. Everyone has a different preference for food. So there are so many initiatives, we can do so much, and we all waste a lot of food at home. And I feel like everyone could use a community fridge actually, because I'm sure everyone has something to drop off there.
Thank you, Ola. Let's take a question. Let me just check if there's one from the audience and then we'll come down here. Yep, John, from the remote audience.
This is from the online audience for Gideon. When you talk about working with leadership in these different communities, are you talking about formal or informal leadership? And could you talk about how you might use both or are both needed to be successful?
Great. Thank you very much for that question. I would say it's good to understand both scenarios. We have formal structures within each and every communities, but also informal structures. The idea of reaching to a community through the leadership is that we want to use that as an operational tool. So we want that leadership to give us access to that community. So whether we have formal or informal leadership, I think as a program planner, it's best to understand both situations so that at the end of the day, you have access to that community. So I think in any context, leadership is always the best place to start from if you are to be successful, especially community-based interventions. Yeah.
Thanks, Gideon. And I saw we had a question down here.
Marty Hellman, Boothby Harbor Rotary Club in Maine. According to that incredible news source, Rotary Magazine, the current issue is on food insecurity, and according to Rotary Magazine, 1/3 of the food purchased in the United States ends up in landfill or is otherwise wasted. Now, assuming that that's a true fact.
It is.
33%. By the way, the researchers did not check my kitchen. So that's my question. Is this industrial wastage? Is this restaurant wastage? And God knows that the servings are twice the size they should be in the United States. Or is it Johnny refusing to eat his peas? I'm sure it's all of the above, but where's the main culprit?
Thank you for this question. And for, I didn't know actually, so I need to read about it. So it's on household level. 33% around. The thing is, there is no actual official data. There has not been done research, like, don't quote me on that because I don't remember how many years, but it's a lot of years. And there was literally last year, USDA had a grant offer. So I was part of the World Food Policy Center at Duke, and we were actually writing a grant proposal for that, for measuring the household level food waste. I don't know what happened to it right now, actually. I need to check. But if it's still ongoing, the grant. Yeah, it's around 30% on a household level. There are different, for example, actually at Duke, there was an app recently developed that might be, I don't know when it's going to be introduced, that's going to be, there will be some students actually that will be following like their journey with food at home to see how much they actually waste on a daily basis. And it's much more than we think, because actually the official data say something about 15%, which is absolutely not true, because all the research done so like lately has been showing around 30 to 3%. And of course, like on the restaurant, like it's much easier to regulate it on like the restaurant level, right? Like if you have some countries have now mandatory like donation, because it used to, for example, you used to have to pay tax on it. So the stores, the restaurants were throwing it away because they really couldn't afford it. Also, it just wasn't really economically viable. But like countries like France, for example, Belgium, they introduced it. So the stores are actually mandated to donate the food. But also, you know, there all this work done with like expiry dates, because an expiry date is actually just a suggestion. It's not that it actually expires. And so very often we throw away food that is actually still absolutely fine and we can eat it. It's eggs, it's yogurts, it's also even meat. And so very often we put the dates of actually packaged when it was packaged, not really even when it's like the due date. And it's, again, it's only a suggestion. So we throw away a lot of good food that is absolutely not expired. So I think there is a huge work, educational work to be done, and also regulatory work, where we actually make the producers to like put the exact date, and it's just maybe like, for example, not sold by, but just really like when it's still edible, and prolong a little bit the period, because people are throwing away a lot of good food. So.
And John, do we have any more online questions? Okay, anyone in, yes, right here up front.
Thank you. My name's Daniel Rabin. I'm a visitor. I'm from Connecticut. Okay. The accounting is a huge issue in a lot of different areas. I'm thinking of industrial waste or running cars on gasoline, for example. Have you looked into, or I should say, are there any examples of implementation of TCA in other sectors that could inform your activity in the food sector?
That's a great question. You kind of, yeah. I didn't. I mean, I did, but the thing is, it's quite new to the food industry. So you're right, like food, I would say probably came the last, the true cost accounting. And I don't know, there's definitely, I feel like any places like car industry, I would say. It's just my assumption. Never worked in the car industry, so I don't know. But I would feel like there it's much easier because things are much more measurable, and also the supply chains are just like, you know, I think with the food system, the problem is just like it's so diverse and there are so many more factors involved. But I would say that when it comes to industrial agriculture, that's the easiest part, because, you know, now we're trying to really there's this tendency to call agriculture like as an industry. And there's a huge backlash from the farming community because they say we're special. Even like there's this exceptionalism of like agriculture in the US, right? The whole concept. And I feel like we should, unfortunately, when it comes to actually measuring the impact of agriculture, we should definitely follow the industry. So I can't really tell you like which industry, but I'm sure that there is a lot to learn, because we just keep on tending to look at it as something exceptional, but we're not. I think especially in meat industry, I think this is where it will be the easiest to measure, because the systems there are just like so organized, and it's the most measurable probably industry out of the whole so livestock production in the whole agriculture industry and sector. I don't know if it probably doesn't fully answer your question, but I will look into that. Thank you.
Thank you a lot. Looks like we might have another from the online.
Yeah, we do have one for Gideon. We want to talk about scalability and replication of the model that you showed us. And could you talk about the things that would need to be kept in mind when doing that? Because there's a cultural context or a political context that might be unique in different places. Could you talk briefly about that?
Right. Thank you very much for that question. I'm going to go back to what I said earlier on, that, I mean, most of the times the issue is about the context. So I think it's important to understand where you're working. So the good thing when you're working in humanitarian sector, especially when you're working with displaced communities, when interventions are being designed, they mostly target both communities. So they would target the refugees and also the host communities. I think the idea is that they would want to enhance the peaceful coexistence. So in terms of scalability, it's always best to understand your context. What kind of project would benefit both communities? And is it something that you can leverage on to promote peaceful coexistence? I think that's the biggest question, I think, in this case. So understand the context, understand what works best in that particular context. I think you'll be able to yield the best out of your intervention. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Gideon. I think we have time for one more short question. Short. And I see somebody pointing to a hand raised here.
Hello, my name is Gitar Kimani. I'm a student and member of Methodist Rotary Club. So my question is to you, Alexander. So there's this company called Carbon Robotics in Seattle, Washington State. So they've come up with a machine called the laser weeder that uses AI to detect weeds and everything, and then allows them to at least ensure that the weeding process isn't corrosive to the environment. So do you think this is a solution that would help in reducing the true cost of the food? And if so, how do you think it could be scaled up? Thank you.
I have a question. What does it actually detect? Because I didn't hear the.
So they use AI to detect weeds, and then weeds. Yes.
Okay. Losing my mind, friend. Weeds. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Is it like a startup? I haven't heard of them, I think. Oh yeah, I think I've heard about it actually. Yes. Yeah. And now I know what you're talking about. I mean, I don't know how much it costs the machine. I mean, there's so much new technology. Almost every day we learn about something else. I feel like definitely when we talk about like precision farming, especially where we try to reduce the amount of fertilizers that we use, definitely, because that would mean that like we can act early on when the weeds are starting to spread. So I would say, I don't know how scalable it is. Like, the problem with any of the technologies, like they cost so much money that just a small farmer will never be able to afford it. But that's why we have all those concepts of like renting the equipment, but also sharing the equipment. So that's for me, the point of the cooperative. So if we want any sort of this sort of technologies to be upscaled, we need to like look bigger at like, how do we share? Because sometimes some of the technologies or some of the machines, they're used a couple of days a year. Like the farmer does not need to own it. They really can just share it. So if there's one machine like that, I don't know. Do you know how much it costs? No, I will check because that's really interesting. I've heard about them, and it's then if there is one purchase, let's say with some kind of a grant, because there's so many different grants, and if there is someone who helped, for example, those farmers actually apply for the grant that can cover part of the cost, let's say, then yes. And I think it's an amazing way of trying to reduce our over application of fertilizer, because especially in this country, the over application of nitrogen is huge. So those kind of technologies, and also like, I guess like the Washington State area, all the startups there and in the Bay, I'm sure they're working on more technologies like this. But yes, I hope so. But for me, it's the sharing. Farmers really don't need to own it. They really can share the equipment. So yeah.
Thank you. All right, we're going to close this session, but I know there were a few more hands, and just a reminder, there is the box for burning questions in the hallway. So if you didn't get your question answered, please submit it there. Thank you.